Sawadee Kap. Welcome to Thai Move Talk and another edition of Connections. I am your host, Brian Berletic. Nothing happens in Thailand within a political vacuum. Everything is connected to a much wider geopolitical context. This week, let's talk about this US-backed opposition's obsession with Pfizer and Moderna's mRNA vaccines, and whether or not they really believe they are better, or if this is just another example of them working for their US sponsors' best interests at the expense of Thailand's best interests. We're told by the US-backed opposition that China's Sinovac vaccines are ineffective and that Pfizer and Moderna's mRNA vaccines are superior. But based on what facts? China is one of the only countries in the world that is going back to normal amid this COVID-19 crisis. When they celebrated the 100-year anniversary of the Chinese Communist Party, there were even entire cities that were already not required to wear masks. So it seems China knows something all these nations buying up Pfizer and Moderna vaccines don't seem to know. And remember, these vaccines are not magic bullets, and anyone telling you they are is lying. None of them are. This is an article from Forbes. This is US-based media, not Chinese media. CDC, 4,115 fully vaccinated have been hospitalized or died with breakthrough COVID-19 infections. The CDC is the US government's department handling America's response to the COVID-19 crisis. This is them admitting US manufactured vaccines are not offering perfect protection. And yet this is what the US-backed opposition here in Thailand is trying to argue, that if only the Thai government transfers millions of dollars to US-based pharmaceutical giants, all of this will magically go back to normal. China didn't do that, and they're returning to normal. Then there's something else to consider about companies like Pfizer and Moderna, and whether these are companies anyone in the US or around the globe should trust to make even paracetamol, let alone a vaccine that is injected into your body. Pfizer alone is guilty of multiple major cases of corruption, bribery, kickbacks, falsifying and manipulating data, illegal marketing practices, and much, much more. This is also not from Chinese media. This is the United States' own Department of Justice's official website. In 2009, Justice Department announces largest healthcare fraud settlement in its history. Pfizer to pay $2.3 billion for fraudulent marketing. The largest healthcare fraud settlement in the history of the US Department of Justice. Pfizer. Pfizer was marketing drugs for use in cases not approved by US regulators. In other words, pushing drugs on patients, often bribing doctors to do so, to treat conditions not verified as safe, effective, or even necessary. They were deliberately endangering people's lives doing this, and just to make more money. In 2011, Pfizer to pay $14.5 million for illegal marketing of drug Detrol. Settlement involves False Claims Act lawsuit not resolved at the time of the government's $2.3 billion settlement with Pfizer in 2009. The case in 2009 was so big and Pfizer involved in so much corruption that the US Department of Justice was still finding them for it years later. In 2012, Pfizer HCP Corporation agrees to pay $15 million penalty to resolve foreign bribery investigation. The US Department of Justice says this. According to court documents, Pfizer HCP made a broad range of improper payments to numerous government officials in Bulgaria, Croatia, Kazakhstan, and Russia, including hospital administrators, members of regulatory and purchasing committees, and other healthcare professionals, and sought to improperly influence government decisions in these countries regarding the approval and registration of Pfizer Incorporated products, the award of pharmaceutical tenders, and the level of sales of Pfizer Incorporated products. This is really important to understand. This was Pfizer bribing governments to speed up the approval process of their products. This means governments claiming they are safe, effective, and necessary, even though they didn't go through the proper approval process. In other words, these products were deemed safe and effective because Pfizer paid people to say they were, not because they actually were. In 2013, Weilith Pharmaceutical Incorporated, a pharmaceutical company acquired by Pfizer Incorporated in 2009, has agreed to pay $490.9 million to resolve its criminal and civil liability arising from the unlawful marketing of the prescription drug Repamune for uses not approved as safe and effective by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. The document also says the FDA approves drugs for certain uses after lengthy clinical trials. Compliance with these approved uses is important to protect patient safety, which, when you think about it, is interesting since Pfizer's mRNA COVID-19 vaccine did not undergo lengthy clinical trials. They were rushed into people's arms in less than a year. Just something to think about. In 2016, Weilith and Pfizer agreed to pay $784.6 million to resolve lawsuit alleging that Weilith underpaid drug rebates to Medicaid. Now, Thai people might not know this, but the US doesn't have anything close to Thailand's 30-baht healthcare program. People in America essentially only have insurance. It's expensive, they don't get full coverage, and they still have to pay large, expensive amounts of co-payments. So here, Pfizer is accused of pursuing pricing schemes that attempted to manipulate and overcharge federal healthcare programs. So in other words, making healthcare in the US even more unaffordable for ordinary people. Does anyone see a pattern developing here or understand yet why a company like Pfizer should never be entrusted to do anything important, let alone address a crisis as serious as COVID-19? But there's still more. In 2018, drug maker Pfizer agrees to pay $23.85 million to resolve False Claims Act liability for paying kickbacks. Here, they are fined for using a foundation as a conduit to pay the co-pays of Medicare patients taking 3 Pfizer drugs. In other words, using a fake charity to help maximize their profits by scamming the US government. And also think about this, they're being fined by the US Department of Justice for bribery and corruption of all kinds. And what is the Department of Justice doing? Are they putting people in jail? Are they going to close down Pfizer, this incredibly corrupt and dangerous corporation? No, they're resolving the cases. So in essence, this is really just Pfizer paying off the US Department of Justice to make all of these cases go away. And then they keep doing it. Now, if you or I were doing this in the US, we would be in jail. But for Pfizer, instead, they got a multi-billion-dollar grant from the US government to make their mRNA COVID-19 vaccine. And then it was rushed through the approval process and people are already getting it. So let's ask ourselves, is Pfizer's vaccine really safe and effective or even necessary? Or are we being told that by US regulators because Pfizer paid them to say that, like they've been caught doing for years? And then we have to wonder, does the US-backed opposition here in Thailand demanding the Thai government buy Pfizer mRNA vaccines, do they actually believe they are better than Sinovac, or did Pfizer do what it has been repeatedly caught doing for years and years and simply paid them off to believe this? It's an important question, but I'll leave that for the Thai people to investigate. It's also important to remember corrupt corporations like Pfizer don't come to Thailand and ask nicely whether or not the Thai government wants to buy their products. They really leave the Thai government no choice. The Thai government isn't as big or as strong as, say, China to be able to tell them no. But the more Thai people that wake up to what Pfizer really is, a threat to human health care, not a solution, the easier it'll be in the future for the Thai government to do what's best for Thailand, not for a deeply corrupt Western pharmaceutical industry. And finally, if the US-backed opposition here in Thailand really cared about the COVID-19 crisis, they'd look at countries that handled it well and are already returning to normal. China, who is providing Thailand with its Sinovac vaccines, is one of those countries. They'd look at what China did and encourage Thailand to follow suit. One thing I can tell you China didn't do was allow mobs to take to the streets in the middle of a lockdown or amid COVID-19 restrictions. But that's what the Thai opposition has been doing all along now. In reality, they don't care about COVID-19 at all. Their nonsense about democracy and their smear campaign against the monarchy didn't work. Nobody is listening to them. Nobody is joining their protests. So they're looking for the next thing they can use to help themselves, not the nation. And selfish people like this are a gold mine for corrupt corporations like Pfizer, who are more than willing to use their self-serving political agenda to make the company billions more in ill-gotten wealth. If Thailand wants to get through the COVID-19 crisis, they need unity, cooperation, and determination. Look at China, and an example of success. Ignore the opposition whose own protests are a complete failure and who promote the failed COVID-19 strategy of their Western sponsors. That does it for this week's edition of Connections for Thai Move Talk. See you next week. Sawadee Kap.